Hello, my name is John Faithful Hamer, and I'm interviewing Albert Nerenberg, who's a laphologist, hypnotist, journalist, documentary filmmaker, and all-around interesting guy. so,
Could be worse.
I teach philosophy at John Abbott College. So we're talking now about the theory that what we see of the world is a simulation, and I was just telling Albert that I don't buy the strong version of this theory, which says that we are just completely in a simulation. I recognize that it's possible that we're just in a simulation, but I seriously doubt it for the reasons that you mentioned, the salience of our experience of the world. The version of it that I find much more convincing is an attenuated version, which says that the real world is out there, but we don't have direct access to it. Right? So we have what we see is what we evolved to see because it was necessary for our survival. Right? So that's the way evolution works. You see and you experience what you need to experience and nothing more, because anything more is wasted brain space, wasted energy, and you'll be outcompeted by something that is more of a specialist. Right? So we see a lot of things because it's necessary for us to see them. So we see the things in this room, we see the things in the world, the sand between your fingers, that is completely real. A kiss is real, you're real, I'm real in the world, but there's a lot that we're seeing which is a function of the simulation. Right? A lot of ideology, the way we believe in various religious ideas, social ideas, the way we believe in money, all of these things are a function of the simulation. So you met the guy that actually popularized this?
Yeah, just by chance at a conference in Toronto, I met the guy. It's a scientist from the NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratories. Well, I guess we should look up his name, but actually, very nice guy, very easy to talk to, and of course, I mean, everywhere the guy goes, people are like, they challenge him. They're like, "Come on, this can't all be a simulation. How about I simulate a punch in your face, or how about another beer, or it's all a simulation, anyways." But what I said to him was, I said that I don't know, like, I see the appeal of the idea that now with, like, when we look at television or virtual reality, that we're like, that's kind of heading in the direction of the same way we experience our senses. And couldn't you just use like a little more advanced technology to replace all our sensory experiences, which means if we hacked into like some part of our brains, you can see that this all could be a simulation. This whole show, like, people are like sitting at home now and they're going, "What? I'm a simulation." And I'm not a simulation. And the reason why we're not simulations, I said to him passionately, I said, there's too much salience. You can feel such texture. You can feel the ripples in your fingers. You can feel a light breeze on the side of your face, a beautiful velvet of a kiss. You can feel yourself breathing and breathing in just a slight trace of lavender. It's so subtle. So many subtle experiences that couldn't be simulated. That couldn't be somebody drawing that up, cooking it up, programming you to feel. And he said to me, and which shocked me to the core, was he said, the computing power of the human brain is roughly on par to a current laptop. Except,
right?
Yes, except the brain is much better at cooling than a laptop. Laptop needs more equipment to cool. But so meaning the amount, what we experienced, velvet kiss, running in the rain, an argument in the middle of the night, all those textured, subtle, mixed up things are not that high def. They're actually kind of mid def, or could be recreated digitally by technology that's not that far ahead of what we have now.
Well, I guess we'll see. I don't know what that...
It's all a simulation, damn it!
But I think it has interesting implications for understanding why we have the persistence of things like tribalism and religion and ideology, why we have strong tendencies for this. Because Dean Hamer, no relation of mine, the guy who is famous for discovering the gay gene, he's been working for the last 15 years on what he calls the religious gene. And he believes that there are some people that have a predisposition towards having religious experiences. So if they go through the rituals, if they do the sort of prostrations, the prayers, they go through the motions of a religious service, they get a buzz off of it. They're very likely to have transcendent experiences. And he says this is very fascinating from an evolutionary standpoint, because an animal that is prone to delusion, generally speaking, is an animal that goes extinct. So you have to ask the question, why would human beings have a strong, or a very large percentage of them, have a strong propensity towards religiosity? And the answer appears to be, this is what the social psychologists have been saying for quite a while, people who believe in group evolution, right? They say that having a tendency towards religiosity means that you will get together with other people who have a tendency towards religiosity, and you'll form tight-knit groups that become super tribes that transcend kinship relationships.
I think super tribe is something that's really hard to defy, and I think there it is. It's super tribes along very clear lines that, and you know and who express power. One thing about expression of power, which a lot of people don't know, is that it lowers your neurotic level, lowers your level of fear and discomfort. So it actually stands to reason that when you mention an evolutionary group that is about to go extinct, that they would go out in flame and glory because they are acting out their power, which they feel entitled to. And so this entirely explains Donald Trump, who, it's like, that's what's scary, is that the amount of energy released in the before certain outmoded ways of thinking might be lethal for the planet.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Donald Trump, because I met you first when I was a teenager, and you taught me improv in Verdun. So I'm wondering, what do you think Donald Trump's success? Do you think it has something to do with improv?
Yes. In fact, here's what's crazy about Donald Trump. Like, he's not a good businessman. He's not a good organizer. He's definitely not a good leader. He's not a good human. He's a devoted racist. He's a huge jerk, but he's a tremendous improviser. This guy is like your local Saturday night improv show guy who can just off the cuff say these limbic. Now, limbic is the emotional brain. He speaks from the emotional brain. I don't know. The Democrats, they didn't applaud for me. I don't know. Maybe that's treason. Somebody said it was treason. Somebody. Who is somebody? You said it was treason. So he's like an improv.
You can connect with people really well.
Okay, yeah. So the skills of, what does improv take? One, you can work with any kind of wacky situation. What are you trying to be? The wackiest guy in the room. Like, that's my biography of Donald Trump. Donald Trump, the wackiest guy in the room.
Yeah, well, if you watch him in a debate, especially during the Republican primaries, you watch him in a debate with somebody who is really paying attention to what they're saying, and they're working with a script, with a teleprompter, he destroys them.
That's right. If they whip out a notepad, they are done.
Yeah.
And we know, the neuroscience is clear. If you're speaking from the limbic action emotional brain, you can say things much clearer and faster than people who take the extra step to translate things into language. So they're telling, here's my linguistic breakdown of what's politically corrupt about your history of thinking. And then they're like, yeah, but you're dumb. And
Jonathan Haidt, the psychologist who popularized the Buddhist idea of that the mind is a rider on an elephant.
Yeah.
Jonathan Haidt would probably say that Donald Trump speaks directly to the elephant. He doesn't appeal to the rational mind, to the reasonable mind. He speaks directly to people's emotions, to their fears, to their hopes.
And there's nothing wrong with that. It's actually good. It's actually something we all need to learn how to do better, which is speak more emotionally, more directly, and connect our minds with our physical emotions. There's actually nothing wrong with that. One of the problems is that we haven't gone to the next point. A lot of us are people that have used language to try to interpret a more humane philosophy for our friends and family and wider world. But language doesn't explain everything. It only explains a very small part of what's going on. So our dependence on it weakens us, and we're allowed to go to use both, or even just one, like Trump. He speaks only a language of action and emotion, which is makes him clearer and easy, more fun to understand than the next guy.
Do you think he's like a method actor? Like, does he get into character as like a certain type of person when he's?
See, this is a weird thing. This would be my guess. When you're a rich guy, it is kind of like improv, anyways, because one of the first rules of improv is that you must say yes to other people's suggestion. So by definition, your servants, your assistants, your family are going to say yes to you.
Mm-hmm.
You may not learn that skill, and that's one of the hardest things. When people are trained in improv, they teach them how to say yes and not block. That's hard for people, but they get past it. But Trump would be around that all the time because everybody's saying yes to him, and he just has to imitate that behavior and see that it makes things flow. So then, so that's why he would be like an improv guy. And now I would say he would still be a nightmare to do improv with, because good improv people, you might share the flow of where you're going. The stories might be, collated together or connected. And with Trump there, it would be always his movie and his story.
Yeah, it's funny because Plato makes exactly the same point in one of his dialogues, Charmides, and he's trying to understand how Charmides became such a monster, and he was one of this group of tyrants that took over Athens and killed a lot of people and exiled a lot of people. So he was trying to understand how Charmides, somebody who had studied with Socrates, could have turned into such a dick, right? And the answer that emerges from the dialogue is that Charmides is basically very rich, extremely good looking, very charming, and so nobody says no to him ever. He gets his way all the time. And so he becomes a brat. He becomes a brat who feels just like entitled to do anything. And he doesn't ever, nobody tells him when he's got lettuce between his teeth. Nobody tells him when he's out of line. Right? He can become, this is why, many times people say when you get rich and famous, people like that, often they turn into assholes. And it's even if they didn't start off that way, because you get away with so much bad behavior if you have that kind of power.
Yeah. Yeah. So, well, see, I think what I'm saying is that later he becomes a reality show star, and he's around actors, and a lot of actors know basic improv, so they know like things are more interesting when you flow. And reality television also is an improvisational medium. We want things to happen. So that's one of the skills of improv performers. They're like, let's make something happen. So all that, and that's why I think if people want to go up against them, they have to be trained in improv, or they will always lose. And the people that go up against them, like Hillary Clinton, are like the very embodiment of non-spontaneity, literally reading her whole story from a script. Her whole life is her linguistic brain.
So you're saying Oprah should go against him, basically, because she speaks right from the heart.
That's right. It's somebody
She's very genuine.
Somebody like Oprah who speaks the same limbic and improv-based language, but also has to lean towards fun, because like I say, he's the wackiest guy in the room. So you have to beat him on that level too. I think, anyways, you have to beat him on that level.
Yeah, she could potentially do it.
Yeah,
that could work.
A natural one, but I don't think he wants to do it. Or is Jon Stewart? Jon Stewart is trained in that direct speak, and he could do it. I think he just wants to enjoy his life.
It definitely seems to be the case.
Yeah.
Right. So I also wanted to ask you about Freud's theory of drugs, right? So
you have to fill me in.
Yeah. So basically, Freud's theory is that there's two of the most important psychological breaks that happen when a child is growing up. The first one is when you realize that you and your mother are two separate beings, and that is very traumatic.
Yeah.
Because at first,
big deal.
The child believes, according to Freud, that he and his mother are one creature, one thing. Right? But at a certain point, he realizes, no, actually, my mother is a separate being that has her own will, and I have my own will, and sometimes what I want and what she wants will not accord, and so I won't get what I want right away. And so then the second big break, according to Freud, and you have to think about who he was, right? But Freud said the second break is when you realize that the world is not fair, that the world is not just, it doesn't work. It's not a well-ordered machine like your father's house. And that's also a very traumatic break. So he says that people who go through both of those breaks and heal and move on can be grown-ups. But people who aren't. People who don't ever properly heal from one or both of those breaks will have a certain weak spot. So he says people who don't heal properly from the break with the mother will spend their whole lives trying to get back to that feeling of oneness. What they want more than anything else from their religion, from their drug experiences, from any kind, I want to lose myself. I want to stop being an I. I want to just melt into the couch. I want to get so high that I'm just like one with the waves or with the wind.
And a spiritual take on that would be that you want to be part of universal consciousness, that where you came from.
Sure. And he was very critical of Jung to some extent because he begins the essay that I'm talking about, which is The Future of an Illusion. He says that the desire, whether you do it through Eastern mysticism, whether you do it through meditation, through drugs, whatever, the desire to be one with everything is a fundamentally infantile desire. It's not something admirable at all, he would say.
Where are you going with this, though?
No, I want to know what you would think of. So he says that if you have that problem, if that's your issue, you'll be attracted to things, opiates, to anything that sort of tends to make you just lose yourself into a sea of calm, right? So then this second break where you realize that the world is not fair and you realize that, in fact, sometimes bad people get away with doing bad things. Sometimes good people are not rewarded. And it even gets worse than that because you realize sometimes good people are actually punished for doing the right thing. And sometimes bad people are rewarded for doing the wrong thing. As we said, some people accept that and decide to live as grown-ups in the world and try and make the world a better place in whatever way that you can, small way that you can. But other people do not want to face up to this. And so what they are attracted to is any kind of religion or any kind of substance that allows you to live in a world of your own creation. So you buy into a religion that says that there is a big father in the sky that is going to spank all of the bad people on Judgment Day and is going to give all the good people a cookie and send them to their reward. And so this becomes a way of saying the world is actually just. It looks unjust, but it actually, all the accounts will be settled later on Judgment Day, or a belief in karma, which can affect the same thing. And he also says when it comes to drugs, these are the people that will tend to be attracted to alcohol or to weed, things that allow you to just live in a creative world of your own making. So I was wondering what you think of that.
I was gonna say, like, I don't know, like, I wouldn't agree that like, I mean, I think those are factors. I don't think, like, what I know about addiction is that I don't think that the disruption of those particular connections drive addiction. What I think is interesting, like, I think this area is very confusing and it's probably because the reality is complicated. But what I think is intriguing is that they're discovering all these weird aspects of dopamine. So dopamine is the clear driver of addiction. It's driving all the things you're talking about, the reward system. And they have these very mundane understandings of the reward system. They're like, when somebody hugs you, you get a little splurt of dopamine, which makes you feel rewarded.
Unless you're Canadian, then you get uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's right. Your dopamine is moderated by some stress hormones like cortisol and epinephrine. and so what I think is intriguing is, like, I just saw this study that said that every time your dog, if you're a dog owner, every time you and your dog make eye contact, you both get a dopamine reward. And it must be a fairly subtle one or of a different. And what you realize, and this is what something like stoners understand, is that yes, there's a dopamine reward system, but it is the rainbow. It has so many ranges of levels of kinds of reward. It's its own world. Like, I mean, if you watch a movie, all throughout you're getting dopamine rewards of various kinds. And this rudimentary concept that there's like one dopamine reward that just does one thing limits us all. And I think that addiction is sometimes driven, or the understanding of addictions are like, oh, well, obviously you become dependent on the dopamine reward from cocaine. And so it's not, I think the question here is like, there's a million things I would love to make documentaries about, but I think a great documentary would be dopamine, like the nature of reward and how reward ruins us and creates us. You know, it's a really amazing thing.
Well, do you think, because one thing, I mean, we've discussed this in the past before, do you think it's strange that drugs seem to be kind of tailored to certain personalities? Like, some people seem to have a predisposition towards addiction to this substance, but not that substance.
Yes.
Right. So what do you think's going on there?
Okay, well, I'm working on a film right now where I like making films where about all about like it's all one thing. It's all one thing. And this film is about behavior. I think that everything, including even drug experiences, are actually behavior, or you can use behavior to get back into a drug experience. So, for example, cocaine. Cocaine is famously like a peak experience. Like, you're standing on top of Victoria Falls. There's a fucking spaceship flying towards you. Tom Cruise is jumping, put out his hand. You, at that point, you're like, I'm having a peak experience.
Yeah.
That is some of the aspect of cocaine. Now, you can go into the world and you can recreate that. Heroin would be like, intense, overwhelming calm. Ecstasy is warm, bonding, high serotonin release with somebody you care about. They all have behavioral antecedents. Sometimes they puff up, and maybe over what would be natural, but they're all behavior in the end. And it makes sense that the most beautiful things, would be behavior. Why would they be just the thing? Why would it be a big fat blob of dopamine right in the face?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So what is your latest movie about, the one you're editing right now?
So we're just finishing a film called You Are What You Act. And it's basically the idea, like, I was struck by the idea that it's different. Like, everyone knows, you are what you eat, and it's important what you eat. But people talk a lot more about your behavior than what you eat. Like, how people are saying, John, I don't know if I like you that much because you're always eating roast beef sandwiches, or you're always like,
they're tasty, leave me alone.
Like, how much pizza do you need to eat, John? And that's not, but people are like, you behaved like this, or you did that. It's your actions that actually affect other people more and affect you. And nobody's really looked into the question of maybe you also are what you act. That, if you act confident during the day, you become chemically more confident. If you act happier, and I know this from laughter work, if you act happier, it tends to stay with you. You tend to look on the bright side as a side effect. People say, I see that you've been happy for a little while. Are there any side effects? Yes, I've been feeling optimistic in the morning.
But what do you say to people who complain that this is fake, that somehow this is like, you're not being, because we're all still living under the shadow of romanticism, which tells us we need to be authentic, genuine.
Authentic. Okay. This is why authentic is a dangerous word, because one thing, it took me a while to figure this out, but what the system needs to do, when the system says, there's a point in your life that everyone faces now, a point in your life when somebody says to you, looks at you in the eye and says, what are you going to do with your life? And what they mean is, what is the...
I'm going to watch YouTube videos.
the one role...
In my underwear. So, yeah.
Yes. The one role that you are going to assume. I plan to become an IT specialist. Or, I'd like to become a professor at John Abbott College. And like the one thing, and our society requires that you get corralled into one role only. And also, it's just better. Like, go be a good farmer. Don't be the farmer puppeteer. Don't be the rocket scientist, jazz musician. We want you to be one thing because it's like it's a general concept of efficiency and accomplishment. Plus, if people play more than one role, they start to see themselves differently. So this authenticity thing is a lie, a limiting, crappy old concept that you are only one thing. And then people are like, hey, I saw you acting differently the other day. Is that the real you? Or are you running away from yourself?
Yeah. Well, it can be, right? I mean, that's, as the New York philosopher Aaron Haspel says, that generally speaking, when people try and better themselves, the biggest objection is people say, well, you're being pretentious.
Yeah.
Right? You're putting on airs, or when people try and get out of a kind of a rough neighborhood, or I've heard this from people trying to get out of like Verdun, or trying to get out of like a res or something like that. They'll say, oh, you think you're all that. You think you're all that.
Who do you think you are?
Yeah, who do you think you are, right?
Big fancy, big fancy.
And they'll try to like
college professor
sort of drag you. I mean, definitely to go back to the substance abuse thing, the saddest example I've seen of that is when you have somebody that is struggling with a really bad addiction problem. They're alcoholic, and they try and quit, and it's the people who they consider their best friends become very often their worst enemies, because they want to drag them back into that behavior, because them quitting drinking calls into question their own decisions, right? Which makes them uncomfortable. They don't like that. So, and that would be a very clear example of it.
This is this weird thing. I think it's anyway. So you asked me about the film, and the film is partially about the idea of what happens when you start looking at the way role and behavior changes people. So some very famous historical examples. Stanford prison experiment took random people, dressed some of them up as prison guards, the other ones as prisoners, and the prison guards, who were just students, started to abuse the prisoners. And it was an example of that role changes people. But I don't want to give away the film too much, but we get into a whole bunch of other dramatic ways that role and or behavior very directly, because there's a bunch of behaviors that we know are universal. For example, the victory pose. Yeah! The victory pose is a universal pose where people basically throw up their arms or just simply expand explosively in space. That is a universal pose. There is not a culture or civilization on this planet that doesn't do the victory pose. And they all do it at different times, sometimes for different reasons, but it's very big and wide open. And if you look at concerts and things like that, everybody is doing the victory pose. Did they win? No. Like they're listening to Bon Jovi. Did they win?
Well, one of the most famous TED Talks is that one by Amy Cuddy, right, who used to work at Harvard, and she talked all about power posing. And then she was one of the many...
She got in trouble.
Yeah, one of the many social scientists that got in trouble recently when people started trying to replicate their studies and found out that many of them just couldn't pass muster.
That was a gigantic nerdgasm. So basically,
I think there's going to be a new entry in the Urban Dictionary tomorrow from Albert Nerenberg. Nerdgasm by Albert Nerenberg.
They're basically a bunch of, I think, mostly male professors, but sometimes female professors got together and said, this idea that your pose gestures can affect your confidence levels or how you're perceived is just like a kind of a fiction. It's wishful thinking. It's not really there. And it failed to replicate because she did make a mistake. She said that there was detectable increases in blood testosterone the moment you power pose. And that's not true. It's not detectable, or it didn't work out in other samples. So her explanation, which is quite correct, is that a bunch of it's proven about within psychology, it's in question. Within a bunch of other sciences, it's very clear that that posture, like we know this with the study of alpha animals, that alpha animals always do these power posing postures, and they are totally understood by the other animal. And every actor knows this. Every actor knows that power posing is real, because when people say that was a powerful performance, they can feel those qualities of it. So it's not. That's what's weird. Amy Cuddy invented something new, and the scientific establishment came along and said, "There's nothing new here. Nothing. No, nothing new."
Yeah, well, I think she took a stab at explaining what the mechanism was,
Right,
and she was
wrong. And she was wrong.
Maybe it would have been better if she just went for a sort of phenomenological approach and just say, "Look, this is what I see that this is happening, and here's how it seems to be happening. This is what it looks like." And rather than trying to explain the mechanism, maybe that would have been, because very often advances in science, advances in lots of things happen because people stop trying to explain how something's happening. And
they just do it.
They just
do it.
They talk about what they're actually seeing,
Yeah.
right? Like Galileo talking about what things actually look like, right? And Newton talking about what do they actually look like from the outside, rather than immediately going to the explanation, right? Because I mean that's one of the big blind spots. It's a great strength of our species. We have these phenomenal capacity for imagination. We're very, very good at coming up with narratives to explain things, to confabulate on the spot.
But you know what else we're really good at, which we don't get credit for? Okay, every once in a while, people are always writing this cliche. It's a meme. They're like, "Oh, humans, we're so terrible. We just can't get along. We're always fighting. We're all such jerks." Now, I think there is some truth to that, but if you actually put it in a historical context, just go back in evolution a few hundreds of thousands of years, you've got weird...
Oh, you don't even have to go that far.
Right, you've got monkey people. And monkeys and primates, you can't even put more than 20 of them in a room.
No.
I've been to a concert with 100,000 people.
So
Somebody maybe stepped on somebody's foot. There's a lot of civility generally. In fact, the expectation should be we are actually extremely good at getting along.
Oh yeah.
We just don't.
And now more so than ever before in our history.
That's right. We socialize in much more. In my lifetime, I've seen how people have become more social. So yeah, it's not true that we're huge jerks. We're maybe huge jerks for other reasons.
Well, I think the main reason that we're jerks is that for most of our history...
Why we're jerks? With John Hamer.
Yeah, exactly. For the vast majority of our history, we lived in small groups of, 30 to 150 individuals.
That's why they
small
say
groups,
you can
tribal,
only
right?
know 150 people or something like that.
Yeah, apparently that's the average. But we lived in small groups, so we are by nature very, very tribal. Right? So if we see somebody that we don't know, we automatically... Our knee-jerk response for most of us is for that to be a stressful experience, which is why when you have big gatherings like a sports game or a rock concert or something like that, very often alcohol has been involved. And it's no accident that the rise of alcohol as a drug has corresponded with the agricultural revolution all over the place, explain that to me. Well, with the agricultural revolution, we started being able to sustain larger populations, more concentrated in towns. And so suddenly you had people living with other people in very large numbers like never before, right? And so drinking is one of those things that allows people to get over their natural inhibitions towards interacting with strangers. I mean, this is like Susan Cain in her book Quiet. She says when somebody hands you a glass of beer, what they should really say is, here's a cup of extroversion, right? So it helps you to...
That's a good name for a beer name. Extroversion beer. You're out with the boys, and your time to say what you really think.
Yeah, exactly.
You're a horse's ass. I've been drinking extroversion beer.
Well, you gotta,
I'll take another one.
The doses in the poison, or the poisons in the dose. It depends. If you have too much, right, then you get so extroverted, you're just an asshole. But
this is the most extroverted beer I've ever had.
But it's funny when you see societies that are really, really uptight, like sort of you see like in Finland, for instance, right? Like they drink like crazy.
You seem quiet. Can I get you an extroversion beer?
And these I've drank with Finns, and it's hilarious. They'll do like all these shots of vodka, and most people would barely be able to walk, or anything, but they're completely fine. And this gives them the confidence to look you in the eyes and say, "Hello, my name is Gauko."
But you're dead right. alcohol's role, and falsely, actually. Here's an interesting thing. So people are always told, like, and I felt this too, that when you're shy and you're not feeling confident, to have a couple beers. And it is true, like it is a fairly, a somewhat effective relaxant. But, you know, a breathing exercise, and also everything else they teach you in life is that when you have like a problem that you should solve, like let's say you're afraid to socialize or something like that, should you manage it with a strange substance that's similar to a paint solvent? I'm feeling a little bit socially awkward. Maybe I'll ingest some paint solvent.
But, you know, every human group that we know of in all different continents, different historical periods, have been getting themselves fucked up in one way or another.
But we know why. It's interesting why, and it's not discussed enough. You know, there's actually pretty interesting films about fruit falling off. You see it more in Africa. It would have happened here when you had the rise of apple trees and orchards, which would have been overly done with the rise of sort of rural civilizations. That as the fruit falls, it falls on the ground. It's not all. Some of it ferments on the ground, and so you can accidentally get drunk, or you don't have any fresh apples. You only have old rotten apples. So you're like, oh, I guess that's what we're having. And then you're like, we're howling at the moon and mooning the town square. And so,
well, I mean, but I've seen animals get drunk. I've seen squirrels get drunk.
Yes.
I've seen bears.
It's a naturally
get
occurring
drunk.
thing.
Raccoons.
It's naturally occurring in the environment.
Yeah,
drunkenness.
Yeah, and if they have repeated access to it, it can be habit forming. They actually really like it, so they'll go back to it, right? So I know you've claimed that you can actually have a alcohol-free bar. How do you do that?
Okay, well, this is like a project I'm involved with called the Hypnotic Bar, and the idea is that I noticed that in trance states, so these are the deeper hypnotic states, people can experience drug states, and virtually any of them. I would say it takes a bit of work because, so let's say ecstasy. So I hypnotize people to re-experience ecstasy, and I assure you, some of the people that do it get very close or have the experience.
Wow.
So
where do I sign up?
It requires there's only one catch, which is it requires a certain depth of trance, which is pretty deep. But about 20% of people can do it. So I can take a group of 100 people. Out of them, I can find about 20 or 25. And those people, you can put them in the deep trance, obviously with their consent. And then they can experience different drug effects, partly done with behavior. So ecstasy, the way you would do it, the way I do it, is I saw research that shows that gentle eye contact between people who are compassionate towards each other, so people sitting across from each other, produces serotonin. And one of the rules of hypnosis is that if you have something, you can turn it up. So if I've just got a little bit of serotonin and then the person's in a very suggestible state, it's not hard to just bring it up. So you have two people that are already relaxed. You have them look in their eyes. You have them experience sort of basic eye gazing where they feel warm, nice, sort of vulnerable feeling. And then you say, hey, take that feeling, turn it up. Or you use other means to maybe put them into that up state. Then they get close. So I started thinking, I did this as a bunch of tests with different groups and different organizations. And I thought, you could actually have a bar where people go. They could be hypnotized by robots, but it would be better if they're hypnotized by people. But they get hypnotized by robots, and they would say, you would make a selection of what altered state would you like to be in? And you'd be like, I'd like to feel like I have 3 beers and smoked 1 joint and maybe a whiskey or something like that. So you choose that state, and then you are hypnotized back into that state, and then you are allowed to roam freely, probably with some instructions to respect everyone else and be loving and positive or whatever it is. And then you just wander around in your altered state, and you don't have any alcohol or any drugs in you. You just have the hopefully positive effects that are produced by behavior and trance.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I mean, I thought tantric sex where you have orgasmless sex was weird, but alcohol-free drunkenness, that's pretty wild. But I know that there is like a sort of Pavlovian thing where if you have an association to a particular situation or a particular person or a particular music very often can do this, right? If you, let's say you, like for instance, there's this one song by Daft Punk called One More Time, and I heard this song for the first time in a particular like a rave context, right? And it was a very ecstatic, amazing experience with a bunch of people dancing all night till the sun came up, and then very often afterwards, whenever I would hear that song, it would be in a similarly amazing situation. So now, even, going on like 20 years later, when I hear just the first little bit of that song, I immediately get like a rush of something. I don't know if it's dopamine, but I get this rush of emotion and I feel in an amazing mood. And so before I'm sort of teaching, it's in the morning and I'm just really not in a good headspace to be going to teach. In my office, I'll close my office and close the blinds, and I'll put on like a song like Daft Punk One More Time, and I'll listen to it and dance around like an idiot in my office for like 30 seconds.
Yes.
And then I'll go and teach my class, and I'm like in the zone, right? So
you're probably
why is that working?
Because I would guess that you're recreating. Well, first of all, again, on the theme of reward, that reward is much more complex and beautiful than it's presented as being. Like, it's not just dopamine. It's just like same reason stress is not just cortisol. The people are always like, oh, that's the stress hormone, cortisol, as if it's all one. There's so many different kinds of stress, and I'm sure that cortisol as a compound is evident maybe chemically in those conditions, but they're missing huge parts of the story. So I think that like with music engages in a neurochemical way. You can get high on a song.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's
I totally agree with the Friedrich Nietzsche. He says without music, life would be a mistake. I totally buy that. Yeah. So you think that's a neurological thing that's going on there? Absolutely.
I think people are just more aware of it. I think it's one of the effects of actually drugs, because people journey in drug states, and so they're now aware that they journey through other experiences. So you're in the car, like driving home, and a particularly memorable song. Like I recently rediscovered this song. What's it called? I forgot the name of it, but I was struck by how emotional and powerful it was, and how much it was like a drug state, even though it doesn't, it's not like, it certainly doesn't stop you from driving. It can be very controlled. And that's, I think, one of our problems with our world is that we are binge users of drugs. So all our experiences are always extreme, and we don't recognize that there's a lot of power in the subtle spectrum of experience.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
What do you think about the whole theory of flow?
Flow?
Jake sent me high, like he says that people ask themselves, am I happy? Am I happy? Am I having a good time? And that actually bums them out way more. And that, in fact, Csikszentmihalyi says that people who are, generally speaking, really healthy and happy mentally are people that, on a regular basis, forget about time. They engage in some sort of activity, which, whether it be like playing video games or whether it be driving.
That makes sense.
Driving.
Forget about time.
Yeah, and just like sort of get into a zone where you're having so much fun that you forget about time.
Sure, just listen to the podcast. Forget about time. Just let time go.
Well, do we maybe we want to forget about time?
No, but it makes sense because time is a illusion. In fact, here's the weird thing. There's a bunch of things you want to ask why nobody's done the history of, and one of the bizarre theories is that, so for example, this is a really good example of this, is the education system. Nobody really knows the history of the education system. They know it came from Prussia. They know it was very industrial, and for some reason it was then imposed on the entire planet when it didn't. There was no reason necessarily to do that. Similarly, time. Nobody really knows the history of time, and that it's arguably like they're pretty sure it's a Roman invention, that the calendar system and the structural limited feeling we have about time, never having enough time, is based on the tithing calendar of the Romans. And so people are like, oh, the Roman Empire, it fell a long time ago, except they've left us with their system of time. and
I always thought of it as a much more modern invention with like modernity, with mechanization, with
the whole
clocks,
thing about like this idea that you owe somebody something, like you owe your life is cut up into months. That's the Roman Empire. That's their great invention. That's why probably why they reached, because they could.
Well, the Inca had months and days and years. They had all that.
But they were after that, and so I think that. But you're right. It might have been other people might have figured out similar things. But I think the idea that the idea that Romans would go to Spain. They'd find some sad sack farmer and they'd be like, "You didn't pay the monthly tithing," and the farmer would be like, "What? That's absurd! I'm just here with my donkeys." And
I think the real issue is that the way we experience time and space emotionally does not accord with the way that a clock experiences time, or the way that measuring stick.
I suggest you get a clock for your podcast. Interview a clock. Just see how they feel.
No, I mean my friend Jean-Louis is a map maker, and he's got an amazing sort of niche market. He makes these sort of cartoonish maps. In fact, if you've gone to Granby Zoo and you get like the map that shows you where everything is, or Park Safari, or many other places. He makes these maps, and the genius of them is that he realized that the way in which we experience space does not correlate to actual space. So it may be that something is, let's say, a 10-minute walk.
Yeah.
But because of the way it is, it doesn't feel like a 10-minute walk.
That's why you bang your head on things. That's why you're like, I didn't know that cupboard was there, and because your view, you think I've got a totally accurate view of things, but you're constantly being. In fact, it's in our film, You Are What You Act. We talk about this. I call it the law of action. The law of action is that your perception of the world is distorted by the action you are taking, and both in action and reaction to it. So if I am angry, I will start thinking that this is an angry world. Like, who's the guy? What's the guy with the podcast? Fucking guy. And if you are smiling, you tend to see that other people, wait, it's a nice world. It's such, hey, look, there's a pigeon. And if you are fearful, you're like, oh, where's the show? What's the show about?
Yeah, I know. And that's why it's funny that modern science, one of the things about it that is, totally true, but really counterintuitive, is the idea that there are all these things happening in the world that have nothing to do with us. Because if you look at our ancestors, and this is, all over the place, it's not just our sort of Judeo-Christian ancestors, it's all over the place. If there was a big storm that killed a bunch of people, if there was a flood, if there was an earthquake, if there was a great fire, if something really bad happened, they automatically assumed that it was because the gods were mad at them, that they had done something wrong, and then they would sit there and they would try and figure out. I mean, you can see this in the story in the Bible about Jonah, right? So Jonah is like, God says, okay, I want you to go preach to Nineveh. And he's like, well, fuck that. I don't want to do that. They're going to kill me. I see how they treat prophets. I don't want to be a part of that. So he tries to escape. Right now, we might think that's kind of funny, but it made sense in his time because there were many gods and gods had jurisdiction. So it's like, I'm about to be arrested for a crime in Canada. If I can make it over the state line, if I can make it into the States, or if I can make it, then I'll be out of Canada's jurisdiction and they won't be able to come after me. And so Jehovah was, like Zeus, was an angry sky god, Middle Eastern sky god who lived at the top of a mountain. So Jonah thinks, all right, I'm going to get away from the call of God. So he goes and takes a boat. And of course, he's sleeping on the boat and a huge storm comes. And what do the sailors do? They automatically assume, oh my God, who pissed off Poseidon? Who pissed off, the sea god? It never even occurs to them for a second that the storm could have nothing to do with them. It's just a storm. It would have happened even if you weren't there, even if you stayed, a dog. And so they automatically, and they go and ask her, did you piss off the god? Did you piss off the god? And finally they wake up this guy who, for some crazy reason, is sleeping through the whole thing, Jonah. And he says, oh, my bad. Yep, I did. And so they throw him out of the boat into the water.
So he gets eaten by a whale.
But as soon as he is thrown out of the boat, the storm stops. Right. So they would, but the thing is,
they did their math. They did their math.
Exactly
like,
what you were
saying.
Those stories appeal to us emotionally, because it's true. When you're in love, when you're really in love, or I guess really high, maybe that's the same thing. You walk around and it seems like the whole world is this beautiful place that is kind of like a musical where everything's turning around and singing to you.
That would be great,
right?
actually.
And like you say, when you're really kind of angry and pissed off and depressed.
I don't think it is like that, but that would be good if your day was like a musical. You're like, morning time. And then the birds started going, cheep, cheep.
You know, the fields are alive. Yeah. That would be terrifying, actually. But no, we have a tendency to project whatever we're feeling onto the world and then to see that, right? And we probably do that to other people too. And that's what your whole acting thing, I think that's its great strength, is that very often the way that what you put out there, that's what people give back to you, right? I mean,
there's also an important thing to say about this is a lot of this is a play behavior. Actually, acting also stands in for play, and play stands in for acting, because it's the original simulation. When theater was the original simulation, it's like, remember that time that you were a big jerk? Well, I wrote a play about it. Yeah, look, actors. Yes. Yeah. And remember that, so the play was the original simulation, which stood in for reality, and we are very good. We just have to watch actors for a few seconds, and right away we're like, yeah, I'm them. And so that effect makes it very powerful. But the key thing is that it's play, that you're not fighting, you're not hurting each other, that we have the capacity to sit and watch a weird story without stealing each other's food or doing something terrible. And that's why it's sort of by hook or by crook, it's a good thing. And you have to question this suppression of acting by the authenticity brigade. Oh, is that authentic? And
well, it's dangerous, right? Because the more that if you act and you think about different scenarios, then you can possibly think of scenarios that would challenge the status quo in various ways.
There's another side to it too, is that when you act and you are embodied, you live a more action-based lifestyle, and where you're just more physical. And if the citizenry was living in their bodies and saw like upsetting or scary things, they would react differently than if they were not in their bodies. Which is like how people are. They're like, oh look, climate change. There's a gathering storm that should likely produce our extinction. Do you have any more Cheetos?
I've been wanting to ask you this for years. Do you think, generally speaking, nature or evolution wants us to be happy? Do you think like our default state, most of us, is to be happy? Or do you think, because I've heard really interesting arguments in both directions. I've heard some people say that actually the only way you can really be happy is to hack your system, because your system has been designed by evolution to be sort of dissatisfied and to want more, because that's good for the species. That's good for your genes, but it's maybe not good for your mental state.
I can give a pretty direct answer to that, I think. I think what is interesting is, like, I haven't done a lot of research about this, but I did I covered a few studies that were kind of intriguing about the way the brain evolved. And this is why ayahuasca as a drug is interesting, because it seems like ayahuasca as an experience moves in the direction that the brain evolves. So it starts in the very back of the head and moves forward. And this beautiful arc, apparently not well known, of the way the brain moves forward. So you got to understand, a crazy thing happened. Like the scientists will say this, like a million years ago, or even probably less, this part of the human brain exploded. Thermonuclear neuron explosion of massive growth of the front part of the brain, abstract thinking tools, but maybe also all kinds of weird play behaviors and strange adaptations and probably stoner experiences, like a rainbow of experiences. So you have this massive explosion, and literally what the brain did apparently is it started in the back, the fear center, moves forward into the emotional center, and then goes straight towards the front of the skull. The brain goes like a train. And it hit the front of the skull, like bam! There was like a point where the human brain hit the front of its skull, and so what did it do? It's like, where do I go? And it was probably like, listen to the words of Bruce Lee, who said, when you confront something, remember to be like water. And so what the brain did is it curled down, and actually does a kind of loop-de-loop under the behind the eyes. And so, of course, I was like, there's sort of like a weird tip to the brain there. It has a name, a formal scientific name. And I called a lot of neuroscientists, and I was like, what is going on in this, like the most forward part of the brain? Because the back part of the brain is fear, and cravings and food. And the middle part of the brain is emotions. I love you. And then here you've got more abstracts, like, am I late for my conceptual meeting to design the operational schema of the... So then there's another part of the brain, a newer part of the brain that hit the skull and curled underneath. And the best explanation I got from it was a company that was doing MRI scans for music videos. So their job was... somebody would spend millions of dollars to do music videos, and they had to make sure that it lit up the reward system, dopamine. And so they would MRI scan people who were watching the rough edit of the music video to see what part of their brains lit up. And I think that this is at the time when Beyonce, I can't remember one of Beyonce's videos came up, Single Ladies, I think. They had Single Ladies, and they were like, hey, at the really fun, crazy part of the video, this part of the brain lights up. And so what the revelation is, this is my theory putting this together, I don't know if it's true, that the most advanced part of the brain is the fun brain. The fun brain, I'm not saying this because I'm biased, because I'd like to know that, I'd like to believe that, but it makes sense because fun is on some level about weird cosmic interchangeability, like I'm a duck, or we're all at the party. There's so many like momentary structural changes in thinking, emotion, and a range of things going on at the same time. Emotions, experience, in, out, it's all happening. That it makes sense that fun would be a very advanced behavior, and it makes sense that fun also is pleasant. There's no scarcity. That it's a newer thing. So, to answer your question, what was your question again?
No, no. I just to loop back to what you were saying before. I think that acting. My pet theory on what acting is about is that we have very powerful imaginations, and so when we were way back when, and we have language which allows us to share our imaginings with other people. And so this allowed us to strategize. And so you'd have a group together. Yuval Harari, in his book Sapiens, has a wonderful description of this. And he says there's a common theory that Homo sapiens sapien, us, that we actually hunted to extinction all the other Neanderthals, the other, not just the Neanderthals, all the other species of Homo, all the other humans, species of. And he says there's no way that these other species would have been able to compete against us because we have such a sophisticated capacity for abstract thought and for language and for imagination. And acting is very much part of this.
Yeah.
Because we would figure out through observation, trial and error, we would figure out, okay, when you move on a lion, the lion is always going to do one of three things. Right? So if you run with a rock, it's going to respond in very predictable ways. If you run at the Neanderthal, it's going to respond in predictable ways. If you're trying to hunt.
Right.
And so they would figure out and they would strategize and they would say, okay, you pretend to be the lion. I'm going to pretend to be like the antelope.
Play behavior.
Yeah, play behavior. And we're going to strategize. So in a sense, it's like, imagine if you're playing football against a team that has only 3 plays.
Right.
And you have an infinite number of plays.
That's right.
And you can study the tapes and look at how they played in previous games, and you'll figure out exactly what their plays are, and you'll prepare for them and strategize.
Can I say something?
You'll play act.
Tesla. That's what Tesla is. Tesla as a company is like an advanced species that has way more plays than the rest of the corporate world, which is like, oh, well, this is how long it takes to get something to production, and that there's no way to make sustainable electricity like this. They're always thinking in terms of limitations. This can't be done, and this can't be done. Well, Tesla's like, hey, why not? And so it's we know that we live in a world of vastly reduced imagination. There's no doubt about that. which is a great reason to have a podcast. Talk about really strange ideas.
You have to, unfortunately, very often the way the school system works and the way the education system works is it reduces that imaginative capacity and tries to get you to think.
How can we monetize it?
Well, just think in terms of, the same 3 or 4 plays, the same kind of,
yes.
You are given, you're supposed to look at politics and, choose between these 3 flavors of ice cream. Would you like the libertarian ice cream, the liberal ice cream, the conservative ice cream, or, whatever. So you get these limited kind of ways, and they say, well, here's the 3 available plays, choose one of them, right? And it seems to me that we got to the top of the food chain as a species because we're very good at thinking of brand new plays. I mean, if you just look at where our species has gone,
we would be the freaks. We would be like, there'd be like the hyenas would be like, we know we're pretty weird and we're pretty scary, but those humans with their weird flames and their weird group behavior, that's really freaky. And that we'd be really the freaky creatures on the savannah who like mess with perception and plus we're kind of vicious and sadistic.
No, but not just vicious. We know how to move together and coordinated.
Yes.
I mean, Barbara Ehrenreich in her book Dancing in the Streets, she talks about how the theory of the origin of dance now.
This is important stuff.
Is that we would practice dancing as one, right? And this is why to this day militaries march perfectly in. And to wild animals, it would seem like a giant centipede.
That's right.
With 100 legs.
Not just centipede, but a creature that a freaky creature they don't understand. And they don't have a frame of reference. They can't go, that's 8 tender morsels. Instead they go, that's some weird giant spider.
Yeah, it's a giant thing. And we would look like that to them, and they would have no way of, and this is, usually it's things like fish will school in a way that it becomes impossible for a predator to pick one of them out.
And they do it very well.
They do it very well, right? And you see this also with like pigeons when they flock together and move.
Yes.
It's really hard for a peregrine falcon to identify one of them to get them.
Right? Dopamine reward for flocking and herding. That's why it's a dopamine reward for going to the pub, because you're like getting back in the herd.
Well, the amazing thing is that humans do this of our own volition. We set it up. It's a kind of technology, a cultural technology, because it doesn't come naturally in the same way that it does for fish and pigeons. We have to work at it. We have to practice the square dancing. These soldiers don't just show up and on the first day of boot camp know how to march in step. They have to drill and drill and drill and practice again and again.
It is very impressive how well people can match their movements. We still marvel at that, the sophistication of groups either dancing or marching together. It is very impressive, and thus I think there was also, it was Alexander the Great. That's there were a number of invasions they thought happened entirely because one army was marching so well that when the other armies saw the intense sophistication, which is also the role of dancing to funk music, by the way.
Really?
Yes. Well, is that funk music, the more sophisticated, as a kind of music, it's a kind of highly sophisticated, and you demonstrating you understand the funk is very much a shared bonding experience. Like, we're understanding the funk together. and we're saying that we've arrived at a level of sophistication which we both share, which now we have a tribal signature, and also it is the way we move across the savannah to our powerful soundtrack, unlike your soundtrack, which goes a bit like this. Wah, wah, wah. Okay, we should end it there.
All right, let's end it there. All right, thank you very much, Albert Nerenberg.